I think it's 2 minutes after the hour, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started today. So, thank you everyone for joining us for the latest Placer webinar. We're going to be focusing on restaurants today. This webinar is called Dining Dynamics Q1 2024 Insights. Obviously, this year has been, like most years, a very eventful year already for the restaurant category, and we thought we'd use the Placer data to break down the different trends that we are seeing. But before we do that, some brief introductions. I think most people on this webinar probably know who I am. My name is RJ Hadavi, and I am the head of analytical research at Placer AI. We're an in-house team of industry experts, consultants, analysts, domain experts that help our larger enterprise customers and strategic accounts with bigger picture thematic type questions. Joining me today is Jeff Brock from Hargett Hunter. Jeff, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hope you're doing well, RJ. Yes, I'm Jeff Brock. There's a reason why we don't let people see below here in the restaurant industry. So Hargett Hunter invests exclusively in emerging restaurant concepts. So we'll define emerging loosely, a minimum of 3-ish units. Really no maximum, but for the most part for us, we generally focus between, let's say, 3 and 30. We differentiate a couple of ways, but everything really emanates from the singularity of focus. We only invest in restaurants, and therefore we probably look, sound, talk, act a little bit more like an operator, sometimes than a traditional asset allocator. We've got a couple of unique positionings. One of which is we're willing to write an investment check that is a little more opportunistic, if you will. Where sometimes that could be construed as small. We will write checks as low as $5 million or even below, with no real maximum. But also debt and equity. We work hard to craft and create a capital solution that we think is the right solution for the company at its point in time in its growth curve, as opposed to just kind of having this is what we do. And then lastly, we also have our own kind of set of value creation team and operating team of functionally aligned talent. So IT, HR, finance, franchise, accounting, construction management, you name it. We have built a team to help not be mandatory or obligatory, but to help support and de-risk operations and growth for our portfolio companies. So today we've got 9 businesses in the portfolio. Have made 13 investments in the life of the firm, which started 9 years ago, which is pretty crazy. So kind of knock on wood, thank goodness we're still here after the last few years.
Well, I think of those 9 years, and I think we've known each other for those 9 years, and it's been you're always one of the first people I call when there's some sort of breaking or emerging trend, and so you were the first person I thought of when we want to break down what's happened thus far in 2024, and really appreciate your time. So as a brief introduction today, what we'll cover, as always, we will do a brief introduction on what Placer AI is and how we get our data. Then we'll cover the current state of dining. Then I thought we'd take a look at some of the more the brands that are kind of leading the way right now. I think that's one of the themes, is that while it's still kind of a challenging environment for restaurants, there's a few brands that are really kind of emerging and stepping out. And I'll share some of the data on the brands we see, and just so you can see you reflect on your experience there. We'll go through some innovation, some things we're seeing on the restaurant innovation front, and then we'll finish up with Q&A. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to log them in. There is a Q&A section on the webinar. We'd be happy to answer them in real time, or if you prefer to save it to the end, we'd be ready to do that. We'll take them as they come in as well. So a bit of brief introduction on Placer AI. We are a location-based analytics company powered by mobile data. In simpler terms, that means we can come up with foot traffic estimates for any physical place in the United States, whether that's an individual restaurant, a retail location, a shopping mall, a convention center, a downtown area. Essentially anything that you can draw a shape around on a map, we can come up with foot traffic estimates for. Well, how does the process work? We partner with several dozen mobile app companies, and through those mobile app partnerships, we are given 24/7 location data for a panel of 25 million devices. Importantly, the information is all aggregated, all anonymized. There's no way to trace that back to an individual user. In fact, we don't want that. We don't collect any personal identifiable information, and really we're focusing in on the place itself. That data that we collect, that 25 million device sample that we see, we can then look at individual sites, and from that 25 million device sample, we can then extrapolate that data and come up with foot traffic estimates for that property. We work with over almost 4,000 customers today, and everybody goes through a data validation process. And generally speaking, our data comes up in the 95% accuracy range, and we check with other people counters or other ways that businesses are tracking visits to their place of business. So feel pretty good about the accuracy and credibility of the data. But we're much more than just a foot traffic company at this point too. And we've established partnerships with other data providers. So we can, based on device behavior and zip code activity, we can come up with personas and profile demographics, psychographics about people coming to your stores. We can do visitor journey. Where is their cross visitation? Where else are your visitors also going? Trade area analysis, visitor rankings, site selection, marketing, ROI use cases, a lot of different things that the platform can do. So just a brief overview. If you haven't checked out Placer AI, I encourage you to go to our website. We've got a lot of free tools, a lot of free data that you can use and get a sample for. But if you're interested in talking more about some of the use cases, particularly as it pertains to the restaurant industry, we'd be happy to do that. So let's get to the fun stuff. And, thank you again for joining us today. Whether it is you're here to learn about dining or just having another screen up while you're watching NCAA games today, we really appreciate you having you. But let's just start with the broader state of dining. And, Jeff and you and I were talking a little bit before we started today, but yeah, I think what's interesting about the overall state of dining right now is that, we've come across three of the most tumultuous years that the restaurant category has ever had. Obviously, COVID was forced everybody to rethink and adapt their business models. 21 was that year everybody was really planning to do that, and then 22 was kind of the year inflation came back and bit everybody. 23 was the year everybody was ready to expand, but there was contractor delays and equipment delays, and now we're kind of in 24, and people are kind of, well, what's now? And my take is that while there's still some challenges, I think we're starting to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel from some of the tumultuous years. All the restaurant chains I talk to are ready to grow again. There's a lot of things doing some innovative stuff, and we're seeing some visitations rebound. This is the chart to start the year. And if we ignore the first 3 years or the weeks of the year where we had a lot of weather issues, generally speaking, we're seeing some positive trends in dining, and this still, includes some of the issues we're seeing at food away from home, food at home. The gap is still pretty wide between what inflation you're seeing at restaurants and inflation you're seeing at grocery. But generally speaking, we're starting to see, particularly those that have kind of, adapted their business model and made changes and starting to do some things. We're starting to see some progress. What's your take on the overall state of dining?
Yeah, listen, for us, I'll keep kind of tying it back to where we focus, focusing on the smaller end of the market. I think we've seen a little bit more variability, and variability also very clear, continuing to be very clear in geography, geographic impact. Now, to your point about things kind of light at the end of the tunnel, maybe stabilizing a little bit in various components, including the P&L. I would agree with that. But for us, we've kind of seen, I'd say, 18 months of a little bit more pain for brands that are less than 15 units, let's say, and in particularly in markets that are generally considered to be great markets. We've seen some weakness in markets like a Texas, markets like a Florida, markets like a Georgia, Arizona. We've seen some weakness in opportunities and in the portfolio that I'd almost call it rolling variability. And sometimes we don't know what causes it, but I would say that the last 6 weeks, to your point, a lot more stability. And we're starting to certainly normalize on cost of goods, and certainly normal and labor. Let's hope labor is not normalizing where it is, but at the very least we get our arms around it. But in short, we're just excited to get out of the phase where the noise is so prevalent because of historical performance, right?
Yeah.
You have 2024 here, obviously, but the first few weeks of the year obviously negatively impacted by weather, which again could be quite geographical and regional in some cases, but also over very tough last year numbers. And one of the reasons last year numbers were tough was because the year before, in 2022, particularly in large cities, you still had variants of COVID. And so you were in 2023, and depending upon your geography, you're comping over lower numbers. And so, it's almost like there's different markets that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'm excited to finally, hopefully, go back to just year over year as the normal way to compare businesses, as opposed to year over 4 year or year over 5 year, whatever people have been using. So I hear you. I do want to come back to that point about geography, because that, to be honest, particularly as we started to get through 2023, was probably the top question that our team also got about the restaurant category. Why are my trends performing differently in these markets than I suspected? And I've got some ideas, but I want to come back to that as we go through the presentation here. Uh, One of the other things I wanted to do was take a look at by category. And since you do operate in multiple categories, you've got some fast casual concepts, you've got some full service concepts, just take a look at what we're seeing here. And I don't think these trends are too surprising. Generally speaking, we see the limited service concepts doing very well. Breakfast, that's largely coffee in that one. QSR doing pretty well. Full service, they have their moments too. I think the takeaway here is that we've seen limited service and coffee a bit of a rebound this last year. Some of that is tied to the return to office. We're still well below where we were pre-pandemic, but we're starting to see, at least year over year, it was up about high single digits, and I think that's helping some of the growth. I also think, and we'll cover some of this as well, some of this is just the QSR and fast casual players have kind of moved where people are, whether that's opening up more locations in suburban areas. So I think that really reflects that. Full service, it's still kind of I think what we're seeing is people a little bit more cash strapped, particularly as inflation kicked in, but they are willing to pay up. And we see that big increase in February 24 so far. The last few years have been really big years for Valentine's Day. And I think what we're seeing is a very event driven consumer, a very, holiday focused consumer. They are willing to spend. It's just the shoulder periods that are a little bit weaker there. Jeff, out of your portfolio, I mean, you talked about its kind of variation and regional variances too, but are you seeing big difference between fast casual and full service, between your concepts?
Yeah, I'd say that the variance is pretty consistent with the visual here. And I'm guessing, just a point of clarification, in QSR on this slide includes fast
It
casual.
does. Yeah, it does. It includes quick service. We're just including fast casual. We've had discussions about the blurring of the lines of QSR and fast casual in previous webinars, but we'll just keep focusing on just the overall limited service sector here today.
Yeah, look, I think you kind of have to. I think that it's interesting to see the restaurant press start to make a point about the blending of fast casual with full service, and also with quick. I mean, it's what I think the definition of a new fast casual concept today is just a new concept that's quick service, because no one wants to call themselves quick service coming out of the box. So
Yeah, it's interesting on that regard too. And we've had past slides where we've shown the visit per location for fast casual, and we define fast casual usually how the restaurant press does as well. It was about 10% higher, 10 to 15% higher than a QSR location than the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden that gap is completely narrowed. Although late in last year we did see kind of the leaders in the fast casual group, like a Chipotle, start to widen out again as they've done some things. But I think you're right. I think the whole idea of blurring of the lines, and it happens more between quick service and fast casual, but the blurring the lines between fast casual and full service now is also blurring quite a bit too. And it's amazing to see. I think a lot of the chains have had time over the last couple of years to rethink about this. And so you see things like takeout windows at a full service restaurant, things that you wouldn't imagine 10 years ago. So it is fascinating to see the evolution in the whole category.
yeah, before you turn it, RJ, I might even flip it back to you a little bit here as we focus on the breakfast, coffee, bakery, dessert. I get it. How much of that I know Starbucks is been public about needing to find some growth drivers. Obviously, there is a significant amount of growth in that coffee category. Everything from Dutch Brothers to Seven Brew to Scooters. I mean, there's a lot of coffee out there now. We also obviously elevate our view of breakfast. And with breakfast, we put a slash and add lunch to it, usually talking about the
Yep.
kind of concepts that close at 3 o'clock. Is part of this the proliferation of just more and more of those concepts, since the consumer clearly is attracted to it?
It's partially that. I would say just because of the sheer size, the charts here are going to be more led by coffee. But you're right. One of the things that we have seen and done a lot of work, particularly when First Watch went public, is this, for the first time in a very long time, actually several decades, the breakfast category is really standing on its own. The problem with breakfast, as you know, it's always hard to get utilization from that restaurant throughout the day, and get people to come in. It's hard to do. But now what we're seeing is that that category is really stood on its own, and the visit per location trends, for the breakfast led category versus kind of the casual dining, really done a good job at that. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Generally, breakfasts can be more affordable. I think in changes in consumer behavior, a lot more people focusing on that brunch, and I think there's a migration play here too. So I think that it's, certainly coffee's helping out with that. And we'll get a little bit more with some of the, drive-through coffee concepts, because I think that is a movement as well. But I do think that the breakfast led full service restaurant chains, First Watch certainly helped, put a new spotlight on this category, but there's a lot of exciting things happening in this category as well.
Great.
By the way, before we jump in, we did get a question, just for clarification's sake. QSR represents quick service restaurants. You may hear us talk about limited service. Limited service will be quick service and fast casual. Fast casuals, as Jeff pointed out, hard to define, but generally it's where you place an order at a counter and then pick every window, and then sit down with it, whereas QSR is usually takeout, but the blurring of the lines there. Generally speaking, Chipotle is kind of the leader in that category, but others fall in that group like a Cava or Sweetgreen. But that just to set expectations and definitions here. So let's get into some of the really unique stories here in the category. And I want to start on the full service side, just because, again, this is where we've seen some real standouts. I mean, the overall category being down, and you look over like the last 7 or 8 months here, not a shock that visits are down on a year-over-year basis, but we do see some chains that are up. And this is both new unit growth as well as more visits per location. I think there's a couple different buckets on here. I think, Olive Garden, they've done a really good job with that entry price point. And again, the blurring of the lines between fast casual and full service, that don't underestimate the power of the never ending possible right now. That has been a home run for the company, really driving a lot of visitations for Olive Garden. I think Longhorn and Texas Roadhouse are both very interesting too. And a little bit different reasons. I mean, you think they're both steakhouse concepts, but they're a little bit different. Texas Roadhouse has done a really good job on picking the right markets. I think if you look at kind of the markets they're in, generally a little bit underpenetrated from a full service standpoint. But even more importantly, too, that opening price point for them is starting to drive people. They talked about it on the last call, bringing in people from fast casual and other full service dining concepts. Longhorn's an interesting one where I think people maybe are willing to make sacrifices elsewhere in their dining, but the core customer for Longhorn, making time for it, and making that's their splurge purchase at around events and things like that. So, Jeff, I'd love to hear your perspective on some of the brands and kind of the lower middle market that you guys see. But that's kind of my take on the larger brands, at least what we're seeing.
Yeah. As I think about this category, I would say that, of course, we're always looking for the future. And this is
Yep.
certainly not disparaging of these brands by any means. In fact, I'm going to go to Olive Garden this weekend because I want to try that never ending possible. And I know exactly where I'm riding by, so I'm going to hit it. But generally speaking, for us, we're looking for some points of differentiation. You mentioned a moment ago about effectively experiential. They're components of next gen full service, if you will, that we like. Try not to be too nichey, but whether it's chicken or whatnot. But what I would say when I see this is, and I don't want to, I'll work hard not to tie everything back to COVID, but what I do see when I see this is the results of larger, well-capitalized brands that had the opportunity in COVID to invest in technology and marketing. And so now we're out of that. And these, the bifurcation in full service in particular between the haves and the haves nots, I think is pretty substantial. And if you look at October 23 as a great example, you've got the big guys and see how they're doing, and then you got everybody else. I think a lot of that is the result of success of investment in technology, a digital channel, and marketing.
It's interesting you bring that up because when looking at our data, and again, you do have to tie everything back to COVID. COVID hits, full service restaurant essentially went to zero for most states, for a brief period in March and April 2020. And then it was interesting to look, and to set the stage, there was, pre-pandemic, there was about 65% of visits were limited service of QSR and fast casual. 35% were full service. And coming out of the pandemic, we saw a 5-point shift. We saw that quick service and limited service brands picked up 5%, whereas full service lost about 5%. But what was interesting, even in that smaller pie, the large concepts, the capitalized guys, like an Olive Garden, which is part of Darden, and the other large publicly traded casual dining chains were largely the market share winners. But interesting, you bring up one key point there that you started with, experiential. As we started to get into about early 22, that was kind of the inflection point where these chains, I mean, at least the growth that they were seeing in terms of visitation market share started to slow. And what it was the experiential concepts. And you can define experiential a lot of ways, and I'd love to hear how you define it. But we started to see the kind of more play focus, the Dave and Buster's, the main events start to gain share. We started to see the more experiential dining, like again Korean or Kura Sushi, start to pick it up. And then this is where we started to see a lot of exciting local brands. So I agree that the large players are in a good position in terms of capitalization and things like that. But I also don't want to rule out the space that you particularly invest in, because there's a lot of really exciting concepts that are starting to see some market share gains in a lot of markets.
Yeah, and the challenge, of course, is how do you always delineate between something that is trend forward and trendy?
Yeah,
And so that's the challenge sometimes. We'd rather move slower at times in making those decisions and be more conservative, and take less risk than to jump on a trend that, even if I personally adhere to it and love it and personally enjoy it, doesn't necessarily mean it could be something that that really is going to be a place you want to be in the long term. So
absolutely. Completely agree with you on that one. So let's shift to fast casual here. And, the story, Sweetgreen and Kava, were part of that pack. Sweetgreen was part of the 2021 IPOs. Kava obviously did their IPO just in 23. I think they're both very interesting stories. And I think a lot of it too, this is where we can start to layer in that discussion about the right markets here. I think not only have they done a really good job picking the right markets, but where in those markets. I think, I don't want to simplify and say this is the only reason, because I think that they've done some really interesting things from an innovation standpoint as well, and menu innovation and things like that. But I think picking, being ahead of the curve in terms of suburban, obviously we've seen more people work from home post-pandemic than we saw before. And so I think being in the right markets has helped considerably for these guys. And again, reminder that this number is an absolute number. This is not a comparable number. This includes both restaurant unit growth as well as visits per location. But Kava in particular too, and Brett Schulman and the team have done a great job there. Mediterranean concepts, we really have not had a national concept at this stage, and they've really done that in terms of visits per location. They're right there with some of the leaders in the category. So it's been interesting to kind of watch. And so even though we were talking about the blurring of the lines between fast casual and quick service, there still are some stories that are doing very well in this category. And I know you've got some interesting concepts in your portfolio as well. What kind of stands out for you in the fast casual side?
yeah. Well, first of all, you mentioned Brett, and he's done a phenomenal job. Just in just one of the people you want to pull for. One of the
Yeah,
great
exactly.
great people. So it's been fun to watch Kava, and we laugh about it. Brett and I met in store number 2, so, it's been something we've enjoyed following for a long time. Yeah, listen, everybody's got their thesis and their perspective. We're big fans of balance. We're big fans in fast casual for trying to find. Not everybody can be the Chipotle of. The
Yeah,
Chipotle is
exactly.
a magical concept, generally speaking. And this is just us. Everybody's a little different, but generally speaking, we kind of eschew single product concepts. We stayed away from fast casual pizza, for example, because if you can't tell, this is not a South Bronx accent. This is a North Carolina accent, and we trade in a way that requires some commitment, right? The wife and the children, and we have to get into a car and actually go somewhere because we're not walking by, a site as often as you would in a urban, dense metropolitan area. And with that comes the need for maybe a little bit more balance of the menu, less of a veto vote. And so, for us on the fast casual side in particular, if we're going to have limited usage, we really want to have things that can mitigate that veto vote. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the things that's made Kava so fantastic. They really are becoming, and I hope it's not offensive. I don't think it's offensive to anybody, but they are setting that standard of being the Chipotle of Mediterranean, by with their success. I would go back to, from an observation, when I look at this slide, I'd go back to the previous comment though. Look at the year over year comparison in the first quarter for both brands in the first quarter of last year. And
Yeah.
remember, again, these are largely urban, particularly Sweetgreen, operating in those very, very challenging regulatory environments in COVID. And even if it wasn't regulatory, it's there's also just the consumer behavior. And then look at the fact you're comparing over 2022 that still had a little bit of some variance. It's really interesting to see that play through. I guess Kava's getting some benefit here as well of the Zoe's conversions. They were able to open a lot of new stores on a relatively quick amount of time because they were converting existing stores of Zoe's instead of having to build them out. So it's not a surprise to me that you'd see Kava's visits on a growth perspective come down a little bit because they had so many new stores that they probably were able to pack in earlier in the year. So
You're exactly right on that. That is certainly a factor. The Zoe's conversions is a big part of what's going on there. And we do see a pretty tremendous amount of visitation lift when they do convert, but it does take time. Like any store, there is that maturity ramp that you have to go through. So we do see that. But I also think there's an element here too about, staffing too. One of the things I've always admired about the Kava story is that their commitment to making sure the stores are fully staffed, regardless if it, impacts profitability. They just want that experience there. And a conversation with Brett in the past about, every time we try to cut back on labor, that actually hurts visitation because it dilutes the experience. And I think that's a key message in this environment. It's costly. I know that is, ask any restaurant operator, probably the number one headwind they're dealing with is labor costs. But it is a part of the experience. And that's a big part of, the success stories in this category as well.
yeah, look, and Sweetgreen is attacking that publicly with discussion around automation technology. They bought Spice out of Boston a couple of years ago for I don't know if you want to call it robotics, but for the automated kitchen, if you will. And so they're making no secret of their approach to maybe dealing with the labor issues, which makes even particularly more sense for them in the high convenience sector that they're in, and in the high labor cost markets that a lot of those are in. So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
That is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch over the next year or two, because I think our data, if you look at the Naperville location, which is their first fully automated assembly line location for Sweetgreen, we looked at it the third quarter last year. Our numbers are exactly what the company was saying in terms of 50% higher visits than a normal location, or be able to accommodate 50% more visits than a normal location. That has generally held up. In the fourth quarter and early in the first quarter, some variation of weather, but generally speaking, that is going to, that's held up. And I think a lot of people are using that as kind of the blueprint. Chipotle's talked about assembly line automation, and I think a lot of in the bowl concept space, I think we're going to continue to see a lot more investment on those fronts. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit more to and just a perfect segue to talk talk about innovation here. By the way, we do have a question on challenges with site selection outside of labor and rent. I want to save that for a couple slides coming up, but I thought we'd just speed ahead a little bit just because, this discussion has been so good, but we do want to cover some other ground here. Um, you know, this is you mentioned this earlier about the trend towards kind of small format coffee. We've looked at breakfast and the coffee category as a whole. We are seeing this drive-through concept come up, and again, everything ties back to COVID and changing behavior and people being a lot more accepting of getting coffee through a drive-through. COVID hit, and then kind of Dutch Bros hit the scene, really started to expand eastward into markets like Texas, Missouri, Tennessee, really that whole pocket in the Southeast, which, by the way, we've seen a ton of migration growth. We've seen groups like Seven Brew and Dutch and Scooters all kind of pop in. And it's interesting too, so we look at coffee as a percentage of overall dining visits. It's still a lot lower in these markets than others. And so I think it's interesting kind of, let's two-part question on this one, Jeff. What's your take on the overall kind of drive-through model for coffee? And then just kind of how does that kind of fit into some of the markets that you're talking about too? I know you operate a lot in the South and Southeast markets, although you do have a national presence. Just kind of your take on this slide, initial impressions and kind of the overall take.
Yeah, it's my take is on this is very is going to be pretty pedestrian, and it's just a matter that there is a lot of growth with these drive-throughs, double drive-throughs, triple drive-throughs. Where you got cosmics up there, coming in your neck of the world. And clearly, the convenience factor was kicked into overdrive in COVID, and I'm guessing we never go back, right? So
Yeah.
we're all willing to execute and behave that way. One of our brands, for example, we can't get a drive-through for every store, so that makes operations pretty difficult. What we do have a drive-through for a few. And so instead of going full drive-through, right, we have to order ahead and pick up in the window. That's better than the alternative of having to park your car and get out. But we can't. There's just not enough real estate, and less and less and less. Obviously, we're
Yeah.
seeing bank conversions now for old banks that are being converted to these coffee brands. So the one thing about this I think is unique and is how sugary drinks are being looped into coffee.
Yep.
Whereby a lot of this is actually beverage, not necessarily coffee, but but that is being branded as coffee. And I don't know where that ends. I have to, unfortunately, while I'm not very careful with my calories, I need to be. And the first place I can cut back is 500 calories of a sugary drink. So who knows?
Yeah. We do have a question about, the full service breakfast restaurants. Are they included with this? Yes, they are. So this would include groups like Denny's and IHOP and First Watch and others in that one as well. So thank you for that question. By the way, that's a perfect segue. Talking about cosmics, there's been a buzz about this concept. I myself, the first one opened up in Bolingbrook, Illinois. It is about a 45-minute drive. I made the field trip. It was really more of an excuse to get my 12-year-old daughter off her iPad during Christmas vacation. But because she is kind of the core demographic for this, kind of the teen audience, thought I'd check it out and get her impressions. We got there. There was 80 cars in the drive-through lane. Made it through, got our order after about 2.5 hours. So something I think that as they learn how to balance demand as they open up in markets like Texas, which just opened up coincidentally yesterday, so perfect timing. It's been fascinating to look at. And a couple of observations on this. It's hard to get real, true, accurate visitation data. Yes, we've got the data on there, but because of the capacity constraints and took 2.5 hours to get to the line, it may not be an accurate portrayal of the demand for that. So I think the more important things to focus on kind of the demographic it's pulling from. They're pulling from a really wide trade area. If we look at kind of the average size of trade area for a quick service restaurant, it's generally between 50 miles for a suburban location, 25 miles for an urban location. So major big difference on that. One of the larger trade area sizes we've seen. Seeing a lot of visits from higher household income individuals. Our data also showed that there's a lot of younger people coming from younger trade areas as well. So I think as an initial test. It's probably accomplishing what they want to do. They're learning a lot from it, learning what kind of demand they have for this. And if you aren't familiar with the concept too, it does skew more heavily towards beverages, but not just coffee, but also some, more of the other smoothies and frappy type beverages is there as well. They also have an assortment of snack locations. Companies committed to 10 locations this year. But it'll be interesting to see. I think more so than anything else, it kind of plays with your comment, Chef, about convenience. I think McDonald's is learning a lot about potentially a drive-through only concept, or some other products they could introduce on the menu. Maybe it becomes a standalone concept. Maybe it's something that does have a lot of legs. Maybe it leads to other concepts as well. Maybe they come up with other, kind of almost, character-driven concepts as well. So I think it's an exciting concept, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I do think it kind of, points back to your discussion about convenience, but also innovation. Just people looking for new things. I think we went through a period during the pandemic where a lot of chains were just fighting to survive, and innovation became a struggle. And so now we've got a lot more investment, and those chains that are starting to bring new products to the market and doing some innovative stuff are really the ones winning. So, yeah, any thoughts?
Well, exciting is the right word I would use. I think this is. I haven't been yet. I guess I have gone from being a fun young guy to a dork because I want to go see Cosmics. I mean, like what has happened in my life that this is driving my excitement, but I'm dying to see this. I think that this is has a lot of potential. And to your point, maybe there's various derivations of it where you land somewhere else, but it's actually very fun, if you will, to watch McDonald's innovate like
Yeah.
this.
I,
So
I think you're exactly right. Well, by the way, I'm in the same boat. I think the two of us just, because we live, eat, breathe restaurants, part of the thing, we just get excited for new concepts like this. But you're right. McDonald's traditionally has been a very conservative company in terms of innovation. And so I think, again, to the point about some of the chains and concepts that were well capitalized coming out of the pandemic, you kind of see now the fruits of those investments, some of the investments they've done on emerging brands and other things like that. But the other takeaway is it's not necessarily a bad thing for smaller brands. You can still innovate and bring things to the market and be very successful as well. I mean, McDonald's gets a lot of the headlines, but there are success stories in every market, and we do work with some smaller chains that are doing some really interesting and innovative things too. So I
well,
think.
I'm gonna be very I'll give you a commercial here for Placer. We haven't talked about this, but from as a smaller brands, right, we can be more innovative more quickly. We should be able to be more nimble. And so we have a brand that is pretty down the middle of the fairway in its food category. Let's just call it Mexican, for example. And we opened a store without using Placer because it was an absolute slam dunk home run. We knew there's a phenomenal piece of real estate. There's no competition in the area for this particular type of food. This is going to be fantastic. And after opening the store, we realized that there were a lot of things we seemed to be missing on. It wasn't going quite as well. And so we dove very deep into Placer, and we were able to identify all sorts of differences between this store, which was in a new market, and its particular dynamics of the trade area, and the dynamics of the visitation, and the dynamics of the tourism, and the dynamics of the food preferences, because we could look and see how the competition was doing. And we literally have changed the menu and some of the offerings of this one particular store because of the visibility and transparency that we gained, and we're able to be innovative. The transparency we gained because of using the product, and now some of the food innovation and culinary innovation that came from that is being integrated into the rest of the brand. So, the ability to use data and have it impact what we're doing can work both ways. It's not just about picking sites.
Yeah, no, that's great, and thank you for that. We'd love to hear those stories like that. I do want to shift gears to site selection because we did have a question from David. What are the major challenges of site selection outside of labor and rent, which is obvious. What we're showing here, I'm going to go one more slide before we get your answer here. This is the growth in population by state here. So not a shock. We see markets like California, Illinois, New York, where we did see migration away. Where are those people moving to? Well, we see the Carolinas, Central Florida, Texas, Arizona, and this is percentage growth. So you see that kind of West, Midwest, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, a lot of growth there as well. But I think it's even more interesting when we look at the markets themselves. So this is the I believe year-over-year numbers in terms of, or no, year-over-4-year numbers in terms of the markets themselves. So again, we see markets like San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York, migrate to Arizona, Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Central Florida, Carolinas. You guys are at the cusp of a lot of really cool growth stories. And you catch them at the earlier stage, particularly when they're kind of moving from market number 1 to 2 and 3 and 4. What are the challenges you're seeing on the site selection front? Kind of I know that economics, the algebra behind it all has completely changed with migration. How do you stay in front of that? And, obviously we hope we're helping out on that as much as we can in terms of our data, but just, how you're thinking about that too, and how to keep up with all those different trends. Anyways.
Yeah, there's a few things to hit there. Our playbook includes, identifying the target markets first. And so we'll try to find markets that we think make the most sense for our brand for various reasons. We'll give you an example. We're getting ready to make an investment in a concept that we could not be more excited about. And as the first store you open outside of your home market is going to be the most important.
Yep.
And so we've got to be very careful. And part of our playbook is contiguous, as defined by being able to get there pretty quickly, preferably by driving. We don't want to be in, if we can help it, we don't want to have a super cool concept in LA and then jump to Nashville just because Nashville, super cool and could be a great fit. And so, we in this part of our playbook, right, we identify a series, a half dozen or so metropolitan markets that are within a few 100-mile ring, and then we get the chance to do things like compare the demographics and psychographics of the customer base that exists today to these other markets, and we've identified some suburbs of a major market that is almost identical to where our customers are, who our customers are today in this home market. That de-risks that decision for us a lot. Like, it puts us in the best potential. So we try our best to kind of think tops down, and kind of execute the playbook that way, with the eye on a concern for operational complexity. When you're getting into things this early, well, you don't really have to take that risk of jumping from Chicago to Miami, let's say. We'd like to be able to ensure that the concept can ultimately get to Miami, but we don't want to necessarily take that risk of taking that jump.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a couple great points there too, because the thing that we're seeing is that no matter what market you're in, I don't care if it's New York, if it's North Carolina, if it's Chicago, West Coast, the market that you're in, either as a restaurant operator or even a consumer, has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. That might be movement away from the market to southern markets. It might be the shift away from urban to suburban to rural. The market has changed a lot, and it's been fascinating to us. We've been getting a ton of questions on Texas and the Dallas market in particular. You mentioned this earlier. A lot of people are coming to us and saying, hey, we saw the Dallas, you see the big green circle here. It is one of the largest growing, I think if you looked at the ranked top 25 markets by population growth, it's either number 1 or 2, depending on the time period you look at. Phoenix is the other one. But hey, why aren't we doing better in this market? In a lot of cases, and we do have this slide with a slightly different bubble chart where we've actually got the change in household income ratio based on the people at origin in that market to who people have moved in. What you actually see is that Dallas picked up a lot of lower household income, older population, which is contrary. We see higher household income market comes into Central Florida and the Carolinas. So the makeup of the Dallas market has changed quite a bit. Now you do see kind of that, that second ring is where that older, lower income population. The third ring, kind of the more rural areas where you actually see a lot of the higher household income people maybe moved and got a couple of acres outside the city. But it's been fascinating. And so I think that's one of the big things is not just, knowing, what the markets look like in the past and identifying that, but really being in tune to those changes that we've seen. Did get a question coming in, about just the ability to, as a landlord, be able to help identify sites. And David, we do have a tool called the void analysis, where if you've got an opening, we can match brands that would potentially be a great fit for that. We also have a very robust site selection tool where we take a look at the characteristics of your most successful stores, and then can find other markets and sites within those markets. But again, I think that's even just more of a screening tool than anything else to kind of help you guide. At the end of the day, too, it's a combination of what you're trying to accomplish with that brand and the growth strategies, as well as some of the data that we're bringing to the table. So, anyways, that is kind of where we're at with that. Only have time for really one more slide here, Jeff. And the thing I wanted to talk about here is just kind of the population growth that we see in suburban areas too. This is where we're seeing, if you look at kind of the growth in some of these markets that we talked about, suburban areas are picking up a lot of that household income. We definitely are seeing that shift away from urban, higher household income individuals moved out of the cities and now relocating in suburban areas. And so I think this is one of those things that just underscores the idea that you really need to be aware of how your trade area may have changed here. Because I think, again, no matter what market it is, big or small, north or south, east or west, you're going to see changes here. So.
Yeah, Tampa and Orlando will soon just be one big glob.
Yeah, I think you might be right on that too. It has been interesting to see kind of the bridging between really the Tampa, Orlando, and even north of Orlando too, all the population growth there as well. Um, that is really all we have time for. I think we got all the questions in today. Jeff, I really wanted to thank you for your time today. This has been fantastic. Always great to hear about what you and the Harget Hunter team are up to. Just love the insights that you bring to the table. So I really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. We will make this available. This webcast will be available on Placer AI under the library section. If you're interested in a copy of the slides, feel free to reach out to me directly. We'd be happy to share that with you. Or if you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at Placer AI. So we thank you very much for your time today. Take care.